Principia Cosmocratica Book 2, Technocroplis.
The material realm offers many means of debasing the individual, or of bolstering the ego. The atheist will say, this is all there is, material. When a person believes there is only material, they see no problem with debasing themselves or others. Yet we can know there is more than material through 4 disciplines: music, tarot, astrology, and numerology. In Prismatism, we call these the 4 doorways. 1. Music. In the late 90s, American culture was so debased that it needed a soundtrack for its vulgarity. Enter nu metal, a litany of bands like Limp Bizkit, Korn, etc. What did they have in common? Besides contextual themes like child molestation, and doing it all for the nookie, structurally, they shared an instrument tuning. By literally detuning the lowest strings, these bands created a heavy sound that paralleled the necessary catharsis for degraded culture. The fact that this alternate tuning to standard concert pitch resonated so well contextually with the times showed that the necessary vibrations to speak to volumes of dispossessed youth were that of slack-tuned, distorted timbres. But why? Because the tone emulated an emotional landscape of nihilism, hedonism, and depression. Music is nothing but vibration and interval. You could tune that string all the way down to inaudible pitch, and strum once every 10 years, and you'd have the heaviest song ever. But would it sell records? No. The moving away from consonant, happy melodic structures and toward dissonant, angry tones is just a hypothetical space, and the only reason it works is because of the interior of millions of people being angry, nihilistic, or needing catharsis. If you're looking to point a finger, it should be at the society that creates such anger in its populace, and not the artists that reflect that anger. Music can reflect the interior self of millions of people simultaneously. If your Lawrence Welk listening grandma heard Dillinger Escape Plan, it would sound like vile nonsense to her. There are sub-zeitgeists that can be measured in tonality and cultural signifiers, such as the emulation of American black rock and roll artists by British teens in the 60s. Rock and roll, after all, is a euphemism for sex, and plenty of parents of the day were critical of Elvis swinging his hips, as they are of hip-hop turning women into objects and so forth. But each of these subcultures illustrate a tribal collectivism made manifest by sound, namely vibration and interval. But Western music is merely 7 notes stratified into 12 semitones. Lawrence Welk is merely a detuning job and cultural shift away from Korn. Idolizing heroin addicts like Kurt Cobain or Axl Rose for the role they play in society as a kind of sonic shaman offering a lifestyle that is not working 9 to 5, etc., is just a byproduct of the cultural, not a failing of the individual. 1 beyond 7 is not 8, it's 1 again, because you've reached the tonic, or root note, at another octave, or a higher or lower vibration of the same note. 7 tones. What else are there 7 of? Planets. 7 is observed as the number of God throughout the Bible. Through these 7 tones, man has created a billion iterations of music, for a million purposes. It may seem better or worse given time or culture, but in fact, the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain is still the same 7 tones, as in all history of Western music. Why should the interval and aspects of rhythm, melody, and harmony not be deconstructed and reconstructed in a million ways, as they have, to explore what is possible given these parameters? What music at its root does is offer gnosis, or interior knowledge of the self, to the listener. When the populace is pretty stupid, the music is gonna be pretty stupid, but do not assume the general population was somehow higher intellect in the days of, say, Mozart. Mozart died in his 30s after living a very hand-to-mouth life, and that music was mostly for kings and courts. With the advent of auto-tune, Ableton, and other means of machine music making eclipsing traditional performance, the culture then reflects this debasement, as music has become formulaic, rigid, and created only for popular commercial sales. The major music labels know what you want, which is 3 minutes of song about common relationships with formulaic chord progressions and computer-enhanced vocals. Consider music is an abstraction of the interior, spiritual self. When people like Hollywood narratives, with happy endings and sensible beginnings and endings, that's what you get out of the music. Through music you can see that there is a little person inside you running the controls. This infers a self outside of material. With the right vibration and interval your soul is set aflutter or your anger is quelled. What part is this music touching? Your toes? Your hair? No, it must be another self, not physically available. 2. Astrology. Since we can prove astrology to be true, it goes without saying that there is a self destined to become rather than that which is just being. If that is so, you are coexisting with millions of other destinies for your time on Earth. It then stands to reason also that some, if not all, of your major relationships are kismet, and if those relations are kismet, so your existence must also be. With several interlocking spirals of kismet relationships, there can be only purposeful existence, however obscured by divergent rationales. Through astrology people can predict what will happen to an individual by interpreting the positions of planets at one's birth and throughout one's life. The Sun, Moon, Jupiter, etc. are impacting the tone and behavior of people that you know and love, or hate. Have we not made a major mistake then, perceiving these bodies as just floating balls of gas or rock in space? Rather, astrology can show you that you are interacting with spiritual beings in others, and not just bodies or objects who can speak and eat and draw. Each person is a process, not a static being, and through different astrological transits becomes continuously. You intersect with their becoming intermittently if you have some karmic transaction to fulfill. Astrology is a lens through which you can disabuse yourself of common prejudice or trendy perception and see people more purely as they are. 3. Numerology. Similarly, numerology can illustrate that you are not the only individual on a solipsistic bicycle built for one. Rather, there are a series of deterministic outcomes, and you are underway in experiencing some, not all, of them. You are an instrument in a symphony, and not the main character. The numbers show you some of the paths of experience and existence. If you are, for instance, a birth path 3, you are likely to seek a means to perform, whatever year it is, whatever the regime you live under. A life path 3 might have had a marionette Punch and Judy show in Nazi Germany, as well as they might have become an actor in the golden age of Hollywood, as much as they might try to become a YouTube star now. A life path 7 could have been a rabbinical priest in the Roman Empire, as easily as they could be a secretary today. And who is to say they were not, because, most evidently, this world is an illusion. The numbers show you invisible trails of pursued existence, and ramifications of choosing one timeline over another. 4. Tarot. These paths have been studied by many cultures for many eons. And it is the tarot that is the key to understanding and anthropomorphizing the pathways of life. Furthermore, you can see on this tree of life that each of the major arcana also coincide with a branch of the tree. This brings together the planets of astrology, the cards of the tarot, and the numerology of the Kabbalah at once. There is nothing new under the sun. There are only motifs, repeated. The way that your body and self play the motif of depression, old age, wealth, or being angry, or horny, or lonely, these are all just pathways. You are navigating pathways using socially designated tools. This is what a horny girl does, this is what an old man wears. But, what happens when those signifiers lack? When there is no cultural signifier congruent to your experience. This is when the tarot can show you the true, distilled motif you are playing out, above and beyond the petty elements of cultural framework. Each of the major arcana is also aligned with a number, and this number can give you insight into your personality. For instance, someone born on the 16th of the month is born under the tower. This person rages against the machine of something or another. They are likely to be left-wing, gravitate towards people's movements, be interested in the natural world more than the world man has created. In fact, people born on the 16th of the month love to stick it to the man, and tear down the status quo of patriarchy, misogyny, etc. They might be more fond of minority or homosexual culture than most. The 16th wants to tear down and deconstruct. Alternately, a person born on the 1st or 28th of the month reduces down to the magician, the offerer of possibilities. This person is likely to have magical skill sets such as proficiency with instruments, as a director, or as a dancer. They use this power to show a world beyond what is offered around them. They charm, seduce, and sway people around them into their way of thinking. The 1st and 28th want to magically create the new world. Stan Lee, who created a whole universe with Marvel, was born December 28th. People born under the magician show notable dexterity, ability, or inhuman power at a discipline. Thus, if a person born on the 16th and a person born on the 28th become friends, they will agree on why they should bring about the revolution, but they might disagree on how it should be done. Consider a Russian doll-style boxes-in-boxes revelation of how many of these dualistic relationships are occurring everywhere at once. In this way, elements of culture like, say, a band or a painting, might act as doorways themselves. A band full of 28s and or 1s might be offering possibilities at a higher beats per minute. Every numerical aspect of personality and pathway reduces this way and always has, which implies that the numbers have a life of their own beyond the ways they manifest in consciousness and selves throughout time and the cross-material plane. Through the 4 doorways of tarot, astrology, music, and numerology, you can see the world through the illusion of material. Disabused of the lies of commerce and government, one can be liberated from inaccurate assessments of the world beyond and within.
When the Freemasons in charge want to control what cannot be negotiated, they do so by force. This is why, in the space of things that cannot be argued but only enforced, they present police. The police, the world over, wear checkerboard hats to illustrate their being used as pawns by the puppet masters. High-ranking police, especially but not exclusively in the UK, are often Freemasons. In Hegelian dialectic, an argument can be contained by presenting it as just an opinion, which should then face its equal and opposite, to out the truth. If you were the powers that be, and you didn't want people questioning your world system of governance as you begin to drop its curtain, how would you control and maintain voices against? In mid-February, Daniel Baker, a U.S. veteran described by the media as anti-Trump, anti-government, anti-white supremacists, and anti-police, was charged by a Florida grand jury with 2 counts of transmitting a communication in interstate commerce containing a threat to kidnap or injure. The communication in question had been posted by Baker on Facebook, where he had created an event page to organize an armed counter-rally to one planned by Donald Trump supporters at the Florida capital of Tallahassee on January 6. If you are afraid to die fighting the enemy, then stay in bed and live. Call all of your friends and rise up, Baker had written on his Facebook event page. Baker's case is notable as it is one of the first pre-crime arrests based entirely on social media posts, the logical conclusion of the Trump administration's, and now Biden administration's, push to normalize arresting individuals for online posts to prevent violent acts before they can happen. From the increasing sophistication of U.S. intelligence/military contractor Palantir's predictive policing programs to the formal announcement of the Justice Department's Disruption and Early Engagement Program in 2019 to Biden's first budget, which contains $111 million for pursuing and managing increasing domestic terrorism caseloads. The steady advance toward a pre-crime-centered war on domestic terror has been notable under every post-9/11 presidential administration. This new war on domestic terror has resulted in many of these posts on Facebook. And, while Facebook has long sought to portray itself as an open platform that allows people from across the world to connect, a deeper look into its apparently military origins and continual military connections reveals that the world's largest social network was always intended to act as a surveillance tool to identify and target domestic dissent. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, is a research and development agency of the United States Department of Defense responsible for the development of emerging technologies for use by the military. DARPA had, since 1980, been experimenting with LifeLog, a means of tracking an individual's life from as soon as they committed to account, to presumably death. It was a Pentagon-approved, government program. The LifeLog program was cancelled in February of 2004, the exact same month that Facebook launched. Incidentally, when the sun was in the sign of Aquarius. Many of the founding fathers who first framed America's values and intentions were Freemasons. Tubal Cain is said to be the first progenitor of Freemasonry. A biblical blacksmith, he is heavily referred to in the Masonic legends and mysteries. He had a logo, which is a bit of a Masonic joke, Tubal Cain as in two balls, and a cane. It is this, undeniable is the likeness to the Facebook logo, by having a place in a virtual space where arguments can be contained, alike to how the Ghostbusters contained a ghost in a kind of vacuum. The arguments for and against anything the government wants to implement stay in a public, monitored board. If someone wants to say they are right-wing, left-wing, opposed to this or that, they now have an indexed means of tracking any particular view and those that hold it. By containing, tracking, and limiting the voice of dissidents, the Masonic power structure can command power unabated. Today, if I say on Facebook, capitalism is the best system and that engenders an argument, the end result is not a conclusion, but rather the monitoring of who had both opinions, by a silent surveillance state. Meta has raised a total of $26.1 billion in funding over 17 rounds. Investors have included Peter Thiel, founder of PayPal and Palantir, who believes that poor people should sell their breeding rights to rich people. He also believes that allowing women to vote made democracy an oxymoron. By hiding the weapon of the Masons in an all-volunteer, youth-oriented Book of Faces, an independent company free of direct links to the Pentagon, they offer poison in a pretty pill, lifelog, but for educated young adults. The average consumer still has no grasp on the role of Freemasonry and the Pentagon on social media. That's exactly what Masons do, hidden in plain sight, get to it if you can figure it out, but most sheep are just here to be led to the slaughter.
The Apollo 11 moon landing was a hoax. Landing on the moon was promised by the Kennedy administration in 1962. When Kennedy was assassinated, the American government needed to renew faith in its ability to achieve great things. Every single moon landing happened under the administration of Richard Nixon. An array of clandestine and often illegal activities undertaken by 48 members of the Nixon administration constituted Watergate, which would cause Nixon to resign in 1974. Nixon was not above lying to the American people, and this alone should make you question the moon landing. The allegation by moon landing deniers is that NASA simply sent the astronauts to low Earth orbit, then faked the moon landing photos in a studio or perhaps in the Nevada desert.
Astronauts moving in slow motion is another hallmark of the Apollo TV footage. There is no evidence at all of any astronaut making a leap or a jump anywhere near a height commensurate with 1/6 G possibilities. But if they were actually simulating EVAs on Earth, they would then need help with their bulky heavyweight suits and backpacks in order to achieve the visual effect of moving around easily in lunar gravity. So enter wire supports. This is a tried and tested way of relieving weight from performers, or even flying an actor. Of course, confirmation that wires were used is in the detail. Here in this Apollo 14 footage, you can see a ping, a momentary glint. And again, run slowly. And once more. There are other examples too. This one is from Apollo 17 during the flag scene. You can see the ping at the top of the frame. In this footage from Apollo 16, we have telltale evidence of a slightly floating or dangling effect at the jump salute location. It's as if the weight is being taken off the astronauts' feet just a second or so too soon.
During the actual broadcast of the moon landing, an animation and a miniature of the lunar landing module was used as a substitute for any actual footage. The only actual footage shown initially was so incredibly grainy because it was front screen projected by the government, and the network affiliates filmed the front screen projection. NASA later claims they taped over the initial tapes used for the footage. NASA seems to have a habit of accidentally ridding the world of key evidence in its claim that it went to the moon 12 times in the 70s then never again, and can't anymore.
75 feet, car's looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. Good. 40 feet, down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 20, down a half. 30 seconds. Forward. Just. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. ACA at a descent. Mode control both auto, descent engine command override off. Engine arm off.
We're home.
413 is in.
Man on the moon.
We copy you down, Eagle. Houston,
Oh, jeez.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Ooh. Oh, boy.
Thank you. You're
Wow.
looking good here.
When President Nixon talked to the astronauts on the moon, he did so on a landline from the White House, with almost no delay, and with clear audio on both sides. This is impossible and, at the very least, was a staged event to give the general public an impression of the president talking to the astronauts.
Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made from the White House. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you have done. For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure that they too join with Americans in recognizing what an immense feat this is. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world.
There was no room full of engineers that cheered when the Apollo 11 crew landed on the moon. That is pure Hollywood. In reality, each aspect was compartmentalized and the only available final product was what NASA told us was true, via front screen projection. Prior to the moon landing, 3/5 of the training landers which the astronauts used to train for the mission crashed, yet the lander that actually went to the moon had no issues. There are no photos of the command module taken from Earth. Did not a single astrophysicist think to photograph it? The moon landing photos have many anomalies. Despite a single light source, the sun, the shadows do not run parallel throughout. Some of the shadows run in diametrically opposite directions, implying a second light source. There is a sheen on the astronaut's boots as he exits the lunar lander, as if reflecting studio lights. There is no dust on the feet of the lunar lander, and there is no blast crater underneath the lander. NASA claims this is because of the physics of the moon, yet when another astronaut on a different mission plays golf on the moon, the astronaut easily kicks up moon dust. One photo of an astronaut in the complete shadow of the lunar lander somehow has the astronaut fully lit. NASA says this is because the opposing astronaut's suit is reflecting the sunlight upon the astronaut in the shadow. Mythbusters wanted to prove this to be the case, but Mythbusters lied about their results, brightening the final outcome, which were miniatures in a studio. Gary Funk, who photographed with Hasselblad cameras for over 20 years, was sponsored by Hasselblad and a lecturer at Hasselblad University, does not believe that the moon landing photos were taken by Hasselblads as NASA claims. This could be easily debunked if we could examine the cameras used on the moon, but NASA claims the astronauts left them on the moon. There is some dispute about the boot prints shown not matching the astronauts' boots, which we could also examine closer, except the boots were also left on the moon according to NASA. Why did they leave such crucial evidence on the moon? To make room for more moon rocks, according to NASA. Contrary to popular belief, there is only one photo of Neil Armstrong on the moon. Light distribution should be equal, because there's one source, the sun, and the sun should be hitting every surface equally. Not the case, however, as you can see a hot spot and light fall off in the background that better resembles a spotlight in front of, rather than a burning star above, Buzz Aldrin. A lot of questioning the moon landing begins with the most famous picture of the event, wherein the shadow before the astronaut does not seem to line up with the shadow in the visor of the astronaut. Given that the photography chamber was supposedly in the chest of the astronaut, the angle is also suspect. In fact, the entire episode is suspect, Because the astronauts' gloves were so clunky and the cameras were in the chest cavity, so the odds of taking quality photos are almost nil. Though radiation is incredibly high on the moon, none of the film is radiated. They're obviously doctored pictures, such as this one that shows the crosshair which should appear on top of the lunar rover appearing behind it. NASA Administrator James E. Webb expressed his trepidation about attempting to go to the moon to President Kennedy in 1962. Webb expresses his doubt, describing real unknowns as to whether man can live under the weightless condition, and Jerome Wiesner, Kennedy's own science advisor, claims, "We don't know a damn thing about the surface of the moon and we're making the wildest guesses about how we're going to land there." The presidential advisor makes this claim a mere 7 years before landing on the moon, the greatest scientific leap of all time? James Webb retired from NASA on October 7, 1968, mere months before the lunar landing. After spending his whole life getting there, why? You cannot see any evidence of the moon landings with a telescope, and some of the alleged moon rocks have been identified as petrified wood. Incidentally, no one took a telescope to the moon for any telescopic pictures, at all. A popular argument, and one that many scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson make, is that it would have been more expensive, or easier, to just go to the moon. This is insufficient. Apollo 11 cost around $350 million, whereas 2001, A Space Odyssey cost $10 million in production costs. Imagine if you scaled 2001 down to just 3 actors, and you were not worried about building elaborate expensive sets. Total footage needed, around 5 minutes. Buzz Aldrin allegedly took a Masonic flag to the moon. This aspect never comes up in the story, however it is presented. The fact that any Mason went to the moon at all should automatically make you consider conspiracy. A suspicious number of astronauts have been Masons. The very stressed and almost suspect demeanor of the Apollo 11 astronauts in the lunar return press conference, Michael Collins claims to not have seen any stars. There is a perfectly rational reason for the photographs not containing stars, though that technology was never once improved, some say to mask the location of the moon landing, which could be easily mapped by astronomers if stars were visible. Still, Collins should have been able to see stars himself, with the naked eye. Could this be residue of some agreement made between the astronauts and their handlers regarding the official story? Buzz Aldrin has had many strange interviews and said many strange things in regards to space. In one interview, he claimed there was a monolith on a moon of Mars which the universe put there. So if Buzz is to be believed about landing on the moon, he should also be believed about a monolith on Mars. If we are to believe NASA astronauts, shouldn't we equally believe this quote from Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut, regarding UFOs? Yes. There has been ET visitation. There have been crashed craft. There have been materials and bodies recovered. If Buzz is definitely not lying, then is Edgar Mitchell telling the truth by the same criteria of trust? What about astronaut Don Petty, who says we cannot go back to the moon because we destroyed the technology? Werner von Braun was an instrumental engineer in developing the American space program. Von Braun led NASA's development of the Saturn V rocket that took Apollo 11 to the moon allegedly. He was also an ex-Nazi, which was not known by the general public until after his death. On von Braun's grave, Psalms 19:1 is inscribed. This passage is a reference to the Christian firmament. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Some of the backgrounds of lunar landings are traceably identical. There are various glints of sunlight against what could be wire fixtures from the footage of several Apollo missions. Additionally, given a chroma key and a video delay, many of the Apollo footage could have been done underwater, but not likely Apollo 11 to 14, which probably used the wire technique.
Before I saw the scuba guys, I would say those little things flying off, I'd be like, those could be like little flakies coming off. Like, I never was a bubble believer. And I'm still like a 90% bubble believer. But if they're in the water, then they're absolutely.
Did you just see that one go right in front of your face?
One of the things they do to fool you is they film this at an angle or upside down at times. So the bubble's not going straight up because they got the camera, turned 15 degrees to the side.
Another bubble?
You'll probably want to rewind in slow-mo.
Okay. That is
there it is.
Diver. You can actually see them swim out of the picture and back into the picture. There's nothing else yellow that he took out there with him.
Nope.
So what would be yellow that appears out in the middle of space? So hopefully everybody can see that, but
it's a little, maybe slow-mo it first and then try and pause it.
I don't think I have slow-mo in here.
Oh my god.
Can't believe it. We'll watch it again.
Go ahead.
Now, where did you get this video from?
NASA's website.
Yeah, they have a site that's got all the films of all the moon landings.
It's like a whole long, it's a white page with all these links.
Okay, so there you can see the tank start to appear. There's the diver coming up.
Oh my god.
Now, he doesn't have anything, he didn't take anything yellow out with him. He didn't take anything with him. So there's not even another choice.
Since the Pentagon's black budget has included such facetious expenditures as a $52,000 trash can, obviously the government is willing to tell the general public lies about how money is spent when in reality it's being spent on secret projects. 94% of people believe the moon landing happened as NASA explains it did. This shows how staggering the psychological operation can be.
Now, since language has failed us at some junctures of these events, we must create new terminology to stay ideologically afloat in the Technocroplis. The following are a few terms to help you out there. Mythocracy, a term coined by Sun Ra. Mythocracy refers to a reclamation of your psyche from commercial and government interest and a return to understanding proto-spiritual forms and your relationship to them. Astrology, for instance, will show you that we live in an elaborate lie that obscures spiritual truth. It is safe to assume that other spiritual truths have been obscured by commercial or perhaps governmental forces, and that reclamation of those realities is necessary to cast aside the blinders that modern society imbues. You have to cleanse yourself of the psyops that have been and continue to be made to control your mind. From there, you can only awaken to deeper truths of your own manifested internally selfhood and falsely internalized myths. Commercial reality, like what labor you exchange for remuneration, could only be thought of as what you do in a spiritually dead society. If you are not working towards reclaiming your sense of self from that abstract commercial enterprise, you are merely acquiescing to it. Since careers can be predicted with the astrological midheaven, we can see that not everyone ends up doing something they were meant to do. There must be, then, agency against your higher purpose, beyond your own misappropriation of money or energy, as self-help will have you believe. Semantic blockage. The human primate can only make cognizant so many language symbols, and the prime directive does not allow the individual to realize its limitation. So when you confront a parent, boyfriend, professor, etc., and they linguistically insist on something that might not be true or might culture jam your point, move the goalpost, or dismiss a correct viewpoint because it's unpopular, or doesn't make them feel good, and doesn't serve their narratives, this is called semantic blockage. It's like intellectual constipation, and causes all kinds of dissonance, disharmony, and violence. If I say, there's reason to believe that Bush did 911 and people say oh, stop it with the conspiracy theories, they are committing semantic blockage, and their perspective should be considered invalid. Simulacra. Simulacra is a copy of something that has lost the value of the original, or has no analogy to the original. In his Sophist, Plato speaks of two kinds of image making. The first is a faithful reproduction, attempted to copy precisely the original. The second is intentionally distorted in order to make the copy appear correct to viewers. He gives the example of Greek statuary, which was crafted larger on the top than on the bottom so that viewers on the ground would see it correctly. If they could view it in scale, they would realize it was malformed. This example from the visual arts serves as a metaphor for the philosophical arts and the tendency of some philosophers to distort the truth so that it appears accurate unless viewed from the proper angle. 5. Nietzsche addresses the concept of simulacrum in The Twilight of the Idols, suggesting that most philosophers, by ignoring the reliable input of their senses and resorting to the constructs of language and reason, arrive at a distorted copy of reality. Social media seems to serve simulacra unabated, which implies that some aspect of simulation, i.e. archons, must have a role, however arcane, in the power structure.
The Semmelweis effect, named after Ignaz Semmelweis, the Hungarian doctor who discovered that the incidence of puerperal fever, also known as childbed fever, could be drastically reduced by requiring hand disinfection in obstetrical clinics, and is thus responsible for surgeons disinfecting their hands and instruments. However, Semmelweis was treated as insane for his findings, and died in an asylum. Illustrating that the people alive at your time don't necessarily always know what will be right or true when they are gone, and that oftentimes mavericks in fields are treated as crazy. This is the Semmelweis effect. One period's conspiracy theory, such as that JFK was assassinated, is another period's common sense. How many Semmelweises have brought you here?
The marketplace. All exchanges of goods and services using remuneration of some kind constitute a holistic fourth-dimensional place of exchange, here and for our purposes deemed the marketplace. Jesus threw the moneylenders from the temple as a symbol of spirituality conquering the marketplace. Usury and debt lendership, mortgages, which means death grip, and financial markets for investment can all be seen as extensions of the marketplace. We will always depict the marketplace as a black cube, as if it has a non-depictable, like Muhammad, life of its own. The marketplace is forever, even though civilizations and money systems, and what is legal to exchange for money, changes. Imagine the financial markets being alike to a god from a pantheon, with a mind of their own and behavior that sometimes defies human logic, and that is the marketplace. You cannot buy or sell without participation in the marketplace, and whomever has the most control over it decides quality of life for everyone else. The majority is not necessarily right, in fact rarely ever, yet all throughout history consensus reality has been shaped to fit atrocities that the powers that be wanted to conduct. When contemporary ideas and morality can limit one's intuition about an idea, the invisible energy blocking you from your intuition or personal knowledge, we call the wall of swords. A culturally weaponized line of reasoning, regardless of fallacy of reason, or cultural biases, constitutes the wall of swords. The Nanjing massacre is omitted from Japanese textbooks because of the two countries' beliefs regarding what occurred. The Japanese refused to acknowledge their crimes, and if you were a student bringing it up in Japan, you would face the wall of swords. 20 people were put to death between February 1692 and May 1693 in Salem, Massachusetts in the United States in brutal and bizarre ways, and the reason was because they were accused of witchcraft. If you were a young girl saying "No, I'm not a witch," you were guilty until proven innocent, and could undergo drowning, stoning, all kinds of cruel and unusual punishment. It was the Wall of Swords of Salem, Massachusetts that prevented simple logic and reason to prevail. A good way to understand the Wall of Swords is by the parable presented in Stephen King's Children of the Corn. A small town is overrun by children who are adepts of a quasi-religious prophet child who orders a mass slaying of adults. The adults could dismiss the children's bizarre religion as crazy, but they are still going to be slaughtered. If you are in a community of say 500 to 600 people and you can easily understand that 9/11 was an inside job, but your town is a country backwater occupied by Bush-supporting Christians, you are trapped between the Wall of Swords. Equally, if you say abortion is nonsensical argument and undeniably killing a child in the womb, you face a stone-faced kangaroo court of colonized minds chastising you for what should be a common-sense rationale, since murder is the willful killing of a human being by definition, and a child in the womb at 4 weeks has a heartbeat, yet is allowed to be legally forcepted in the unborn head and vacuumed out at up to 24 weeks. This is murder by any rational person's logic. During the Guangxi massacre, provincial Chinese cannibalized their college professors for teaching incongruent ideas against the Marxist revolution. At least 137 people, perhaps hundreds more, were eaten by others, and thousands of people participated in the cannibalism. Each one of those people had mothers, learned to count, had cried tears, etc. Yet the Wall of Swords of the Marxist revolution numbed any morality in the region. When your sociology professor claims that people of color cannot be racist, only white people can be racist, when racism is clearly defined as having, reflecting, or fostering the belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. And said professor clearly acknowledges the arbitrary group white to be a race. It causes so much intellectual waste fallout that people are confused as to whether Asians are white. This professor has created a wall of swords, using a kind of linguistic magic to pervert conflict theory to the narrative of their liking, verdantly subjugating white people, thus making themselves the dominant race in the hierarchy through faulty, biased logic. Though you could argue that the dialectic itself is corrupted by privilege, who is demonstrating what privilege in flexing a theory into a required curriculum to obtain a well-paying job is, inherently, creating a hierarchy through which cultural hegemony is created. Since black men have been president, black women have been vice president, homosexual men have been secretary of transportation, homosexual men have been billionaire entrepreneur Trump supporters, Muslim men have been congressmen, et al. It is by any rational time to put to bed the idea that the push towards equality is a noble venture against the prevailing evil of whitewashed hegemony. It's simply not true by any reasonable metric. And if you perceive that as racist, you are committing wall of swords. Code, seeing an individual as a series of deterministic outcomes based on the cascade of their planetary consciousness unfolding, rights and wrongs, mistakes and successes, and how it affects you, is observing their code. Code is the verb you, not the noun you. You are an unfolding process, a code, written into your natal chart, and codes unlock selves, and make relationships based on a series of hypothetical co-realities. For instance, a clingy Mars in Cancer in an otherwise freedom-loving Sagittarius Sun's natal chart may not jive well with an also freedom-loving Aquarius Sun, though it will not be obvious at first, like the princess and the pea. The two codes will not match in the long run. Equally, two Libra Sun Aquarius moons are likely to get along, but not have the tools to fulfill each other's destinies, so they will part ways, being of too similar code. Two people who are financially ambitious may share Earth-planet positions in the natal chart, thus, their codes align. So, as you can see, technology and differential modes of societal control mitigate behaviors of society within and without, but who stands to gain, and who to lose?